and I have a question for you. Why is it so hard to lose weight and then keep it off? It is not a trivial question. Here's what the research shows. In America alone, 108 million people are spending money each year on diet-related products and services. That's almost 50% of the adult population. On average, they try 4 or 5 new attempts each year. The need to be healthy and not overweight or obese has never been more urgent. It is literally now a matter of life and death. And yet still, the percentage of us who are failing at this seemingly simple problem keeps climbing. Here's another baffling fact. The people who struggle the most with their weight aren't actually those who know the least about food, health, and nutrition. Often they're the ones who know the most. And they're often the very people who are accomplished at any number of more complex tasks. Things like building a brilliant career, or lovingly raising a family, or developing expertise in sports, crafts, and complex hobbies, or getting an advanced education. And yet, even with launching 4 or 5 new attempts each year, apparently they are, collectively we are, simply not able to successfully lose weight and then keep it off long term. Honestly, any logical mind would say it really shouldn't be this hard. But the data are staring us right in the face. So I ask you, what is going on here? Well, that is what this video series is all about. Welcome to the 2021 Food Freedom Masterclass video series. To answer this question, we must start with insatiable hunger and overpowering cravings, and how our brain is actually blocking us from losing weight. Okay, so hunger and cravings. Let's talk about hunger first. And I'm not talking about the kind of hunger that you haven't eaten in 6 hours and your tummy's growling and you really are hungry and need to go get something to eat. I'm talking about insatiable hunger, the kind that doesn't get satisfied by eating a regular-sized meal. The kind of hunger that keeps people stuck to the couch for hours and hours and hours, eating more and more, finishing off a bag of something and then going to the cupboard or the freezer to get more food. What is up with that kind of hunger? And the answer is, it has to do with leptin. Do you know about leptin? If you don't know about leptin, you need to learn about leptin. Leptin is a hormone that tells your brain you're not hungry anymore and you want to get active. In evolutionary terms, it's the feedback mechanism that makes sense, right? That if someone is living in a land of plenty and the berry bushes are abundant and the nut trees are dropping nuts everywhere and you've just killed a wildebeest and you're stuffed and stuffed and stuffed day after day after day, you put on a little bit of fat and those fat cells release leptin. And the leptin circles back to the brain and says, you can stop eating now and go get active. Go use this energy to find a mate or build a hut or do something else to ensure your survival. So leptin is what kept our ancestors from getting fat, because every time they'd put on weight, they would stop feeling hungry and they would immediately want to go get active. So leptin was discovered in 1994 and it made scientists baffled because they said, well, wait a second, leptin is released by the fat cells, and so the fatter you are, the more leptin you have. Why isn't it working? And finally, in 2004, researchers at the University of California at San Francisco discovered that leptin is not working because it's being blocked in the brain. And what's blocking leptin in the brain? I'm not going to answer you for a second because I just want you to think about this deeply. The answer is the key to the entire obesity pandemic. When we solve the problem of leptin resistance, we have the answer to how everyone can get happy, thin, and free. You ready? The answer is insulin is blocking leptin at the brain. So what that means is, key takeaway, if you want to lose weight, you have to dramatically lower your insulin levels. Okay? So what raises insulin levels? Sugar and flour. Eating too much processed, refined foods. I'm not talking about just the insulin spike that happens when you eat a cookie. I'm talking about raising baseline levels of insulin to 2 and 3 times what they used to be in 1970 and 1960 when people were generally pretty slender. The baseline insulin levels of our entire population have been rising. We need to bring down insulin levels, and what raises insulin is sugar and flour. And for anyone who thinks that sitting on the couch and eating is a moral issue, I want to tell you a little bit about the mice in which they discovered leptin. So they discovered leptin by genetically engineering some mice to have no leptin at all. They didn't have the gene that produced leptin, so they had literally 0 leptin at all. And do you know what these mice did? They sat by the food trough and ate. And they wouldn't move. Ever. Mice usually run around the cage, right? They're like little frisky little creatures. These mice, they just sat there. They ate and they got fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. And the only way to make them move was to move the food trough to the other side of the cage, and then they would slowly waddle over there and sit down and eat more. Were those mice morally defective? Did they need to be educated about how to eat less and exercise more? No, they didn't have any leptin in their brain. Their brain was saying, you're starving, you've got to conserve energy and eat. And until we bring down insulin levels so that leptin can get on board, we're just going to be sitting on the couch and eating. So that's hunger. Let's talk now about cravings. So, cravings. Cravings that drive you to get out of your house on a wintry night and drive to the convenience store to get a pint of just that perfect flavor. Cravings that lead you to abandon your plans for a healthy dinner after a long day and just decide, oh, let's order a pizza. Cravings that have you wandering up and down the grocery store aisles thinking, what's going to do it? I need a little something, right? Where do those food cravings come from? The answer is that they have to do with the addictive pathways in the brain, just like drugs of abuse, just like cocaine and heroin. When you take those drugs, release a big flood of dopamine into the nucleus accumbens and the addictive centers of the brain. The same happens when you eat those heavily processed, refined foods like sugar and flour, pasta, cake, cookies, ice cream, pizza, all those foods. They release a massive flood of dopamine into the addictive centers of the brain. And what the brain does, it's very savvy. It adapts very quickly. It says, whoa, that was excessive. We don't need that much dopamine right now. And it modifies the receptors, the dopamine receptors, and they thin out. The technical term is they downregulate. And what that means is you now are lacking the ability to feel pleasure unless you eat enough to get back to normal. You've got now to eat refined foods, otherwise you feel lifeless, scared, depressed, lack of energy, fearful. I can see it in people's eyes when I propose to them that they might want to stop eating sugar and flour. I can see the life drain out of their eyes, and they look as if life would be bleak without those foods. That's when I know their dopamine receptors have been downregulated. But I promise you, it goes away, because what happens is when you stop flooding the brain with dopamine, the receptors replenish and they grow back, and those cravings go away. So what I just proposed to you, I don't know if you caught this or not, was that sugar and flour affect the brain like heroin and cocaine. Did you catch that? I did say that, or at least I implied it, and I'm saying it now. And it is true. It's true scientifically, and it's also true if you look at how these substances are made. So yes, we have studies, a mountain of studies, that show with PET scans and fMRI scans that sugar and flour affect the brain just like heroin and cocaine. We also have developmental studies in rats where you take them as babies and then you start to feed them the foods of the standard American diet. You feed them cheesecake and sausage and all these foods, and they get fatter and fatter and fatter, and their dopamine receptors downregulate, and they become completely hooked, just like rats that are allowed to overindulge in cocaine and heroin. They'll even stand on an electrocuted floor and withstand electric shock to get their food. It's crazy. They look totally like addicted rats. So it is true, in terms of addiction research, there is absolutely no difference between drugs of abuse and sugar and flour. But I want to propose to you that that isn't actually that surprising if you think deeply about what sugar and flour are. So let's think about where drugs of abuse come from. What is cocaine? What is it? Where does it come from? How do you get cocaine? Well, it comes from the coca leaf, right? So in Colombia, they chew these coca leaves, and they're pretty innocuous. You put them in your cheek and you chew them, and it doesn't do much for you. It gives maybe a lift like drinking half a cup of caffeinated tea. It's not a big deal. Nobody's like breaking into their grandma's house because they're chewing coca leaves. It's not happening. But you take the inner essence of those coca leaves and you purify it and refine it into a fine white powder, and now you have cocaine. You've taken a natural plant-based substance and made a drug. And what's heroin? Well, heroin comes from the poppy plant. Pretty harmless on its own, but if you take the inner essence and purify it and refine it into a fine brown powder, now you have heroin. And what's sugar? Well, you don't get sugar directly. You have to take the inner essence of some kind of plant substance, whether it's beet or corn or sugar cane, and you refine and purify it into a fine white powder, and now you have sugar. And what's flour? Well, you can get flour in lots of ways, right? You can take any kind of grain. You can take wheat, of course, or oats or rice or barley or rye or soy. You can take any legume, pretty much any grain or legume, and purify it and refine it into a fine powder, and now you have flour. We have, through our processing methods, taken wholesome, real foods and turned them into drugs. And the susceptibility scale tells us that drugs do not affect everyone equally. And you might think that the addiction is in the drug. Like people say, oh, well, heroin's addictive. Anyone who does heroin enough will get addicted. Really? Are you sure about that? So all around the world, each year, lots of people have surgeries, and they go home with prescriptions essentially filled with heroin pills, right? Vicodin or whatever it is, opiates in those pills. They take those pills after that surgery, they get physically hooked on it, and when it's time to wean off, many people just wean off successfully. Okay, so what is the susceptibility scale and why is it so important? So the susceptibility scale is a scale from 0 on the low end up to 10 on the high end. And it measures how much someone is affected, drawn in, overtaken by the addictive pull of refined foods. And people respond very differently to food depending on where they're at on this scale. So on the low end, you've got people who, when they start eating, all the way through the eating experience, they feel completely in control of how much they're eating. And as they eat more, they naturally get full, and that fullness is coincided with an immediate desire to stop eating, and they push their plate away and they're like, oh, that's enough, I don't want any more food. And they're not taken over in their life by thoughts of food or obsession with food, and they don't binge. And they may even forget about food for periods of time and only remember when their tummy growls and stuff that it's even time to eat. It's a very different experience than what people who are on the high end of the susceptibility scale go through. So if you're on the high end of the susceptibility scale, you start to eat and then frequently experience a lack of control over how much you eat. So your body might even be saying like, oh, that's a lot of food, but the mouth and the brain are still saying, no, I'm not done yet. I want more. I need something more. And there's profound cravings that go along with this and a feeling of being out of control and never being satisfied. And over time, thoughts of food and obsession with food and what you've eaten or not eaten and whether you're on your plan or off your plan or, all of those thoughts, what you weigh, what you don't weigh, whether you're being good with food or not good with food, all of that starts to take over and occupy a much bigger proportion of your life than feels right or sane or manageable. And in extreme cases, there might be patterns of really bad binging that go along with this. So what this means on a very deep level is that we are not all the same when it comes to food, and that the solution that leads one person to feeling happy, thin, and free is not going to be the same as the solution that leads another person to feeling happy, thin, and free. So the susceptibility scale tells you when it comes to food, how susceptible are you to the drug-like foods that have been introduced into our food supply, and how much have they hijacked your brain, and how much are they keeping you hooked? Now, some folks who are on the low end of the susceptibility scale at this point are thinking, I'm scot-free. And I just want to point out that drugs of abuse affect people who are not hooked all the time, because drugs of abuse have powerful reward salience for the brain. They're incentivizing for the brain, and they trick people into overconsumption even when they're not hooked. And that's why we actually find that something like 40% of the people in America who are obese are not high on the susceptibility scale. And 60 or 70% of the people who are overweight are not high on the susceptibility scale. Because these foods that act as drugs in our brain trick us into eating more of them than we wish we would eat. And so now we circle back around to the susceptibility scale and its value in understanding how potent of a solution we're going to need to, again, reclaim our power and become once again the author of our own destinies when it comes to our food. Because I got to tell you, after living a lot of my early years overweight and then obese, nothing feels as good as living now in a body that feels congruent with how I want to show up in the world, in a body that feels healthy, where I put on clothes at holiday time, I can put on a dress that's form-fitting and feel good in it. And if you are missing out on the feeling of showing up in the world in a body that feels right to you, I just want to tell you that there is a solution for you. There really is. So refined foods are addictive. And neurobiologically, it's totally true. Scientifically, it's clear. And I feel like people already know this. I mean, food addiction is talked about in the popular media. There's lots of books about it. But even esteemed experts on food addiction are making recommendations like, these foods are addictive, so only eat them once or twice a week. And I read that and I think to myself, they wouldn't say that to someone who is trying to quit smoking. So what's been missing from our public discourse about food these days is any deep or effective consideration about how different people, depending on where they are in the susceptibility scale, can best live and move in the obesogenic food environment that we live in. Because the reality is, it's not going anywhere, right? The big food companies are not about to change the foods that they're selling to us as long as we keep buying them. So in this video series, we're coming back to ourselves and our fork and our spoon, and how can we, day in and day out, eat in such a way that we feel like the author of our own destinies. Okay, so a quick recap. Eating sugar and flour causes a flood of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. This results in dopamine downregulation, and that causes cravings. Eating sugar and flour also causes an increase in baseline insulin levels, which results in leptin resistance, and that causes insatiable hunger. So this might make you wonder, if you stop eating sugar and flour, How long will it take for your brain to heal? For those dopamine receptors to replenish, for that insulin to come down so that insatiable hunger lets up? Well, I have some data to share with you on that. I've been helping people to stop eating sugar and flour for a long time now, thousands of people, and the results have been so remarkable that I've joined with a consortium of scientists to publish the results in peer-reviewed studies. Here's some of what we found. In 2018, we published in the Journal of Nutrition and Weight Loss that when people stop eating sugar and flour, after just 8 weeks, their weight loss results are so remarkable that they rival the best weight loss results that have ever been published by any program anywhere ever. Even more remarkable, in 2020, in Current Developments in Nutrition, we published a paper showing that after just 8 weeks, as people are losing these astounding amounts of weight, their hunger levels have been going down, not up, but down the whole time, so that at the end of 8 weeks, they have little to no hunger anymore ever. That insatiable hunger has gone away. And their cravings have been going down as well, so that at the end of 8 weeks, they're now experiencing few to no cravings anymore ever. Now, if you haven't taken the quiz yet, that measures how susceptible your brain is to the pull of addictive foods, the susceptibility quiz that goes from 1 on the low end to 10 on the high end, then you'll want to make sure that you do that right when this video ends. You can take it all kinds of places, but right here on this page is an easy place, or you can always go to foodfreedomquiz.com. Now, this is a 3-part video series. And in the next video, video 2, I'm going to share with you the one huge mistake that almost everybody makes when they try to lose weight. So you definitely won't want to miss that. And this video is wrapping up here, but before we end, I just have one quick request of you. It's super simple. If you could, please just scroll down and leave a comment. I read the comments. It means so much to me. I love to hear what you've thought so far. And that is a wrap on video 1 of the Food Freedom video series. I'll see you in the next video.